I've had this idea in my head for a while and I've decided to finally make a video about it. It's not a mind-blowing concept or anything, but I think pretty much all home-built gaming PCs can be categorized into 4 types. The entry-level, the mid-range, the high-end, and the extra. If that makes perfect sense to you, then I suppose we could leave it at that and we can all go and have lunch. But I'm going to discuss it a bit further for 3 reasons. First, for new builders, it helps to have a high-level grasp of what you can get for your money when putting a system together. Second, for experienced builders, it might help to assess where your system lands in this 4-tier spectrum. And finally, things change and prices fluctuate. So the 4 types of gaming PC that you can build today are a lot different from the PCs you might have built 5 years ago.
Excellent!
So for each of these 4 types of gaming PC, the entry-level, the mid-range, the high-end, and the extra, I will give you an overall price range and then go over each component to talk about what makes sense to build with today based on each budget. The goal should always be performance and usable features first, with things like aesthetics, RGB lighting, and built-in LCD displays being relegated to the extra PC. Speaking of which, the extra PC represents builds that are over the top, and usually that means they cost a lot of money, upwards of $2,000 or $2,500. Here you'll find multifaceted RGB configurations and fan arrays that cost hundreds of dollars on top of the build's core components. Those core components will also typically be the fastest available. An Intel i9-9900K with an RTX 2080 Ti or 2 is kind of the baseline here, and they'll probably be water-cooled with 360mm AIOs, if not custom loops, and installed in $200 plus cases with blingy RGB RAM and multiple NVMe SSDs for storage. And well, just look at any of the overkill systems that I've built on my channel and that should give you a good idea. Lots of extra stuff with extra builds, and the extra stuff does not always mean more performance, but it can be pretty. One step below the extra PC is the high-end PC, in the $1,200 to $2,000 range by my estimation, and here you might find similar core components such as high core count CPUs like the 3900X or high-end desktop configurations that have 16 or more cores. The difference here is the focus on performance. No money should be spent on a high-end PC that doesn't result in more performance, i.e. a faster computer, a quieter computer, or a more efficient computer. Why spend $25 per fan on ridiculous RGB nonsense when Noctua makes the best performing fans out there? Who cares what they look like and what color they are? Here you might find an RTX 2080 Ti, but it will be one that actually costs around $1,000 instead of something like the $1,600 RTX 2080 Ti Lightning with its RGB lights and LCD display, no matter how cute that lucky animation might be. Water cooling might also be left out here, given the range of effective air coolers that are available, although a well-priced AIO might be worth it for CPUs with higher heat output. The high-end build seeks maximum performance with minimum fluff. One more step down and we come to the mid-range PC in the $800 to $1,200 range, and this is where I think most people should take aim. When it comes to price to performance, all the best rated products live in the mid-range, where you get the advantages of new technology without the price premiums of the fastest versions of each new CPU or GPU on the market. $200 to $400 for a CPU, $300 to $500 for a graphics card, and a sensible selection of the rest of your components will get you a very solid gaming system these days, and often with power left over for video encoding, editing, streaming, or other PC activities. Mid-range PCs can easily look good too. Just remember that you should never be paying extra for RGB LEDs when you could be spending that money on more CPU cores or threads, additional SSD storage, or a higher tier graphics card. Finally, at the bottom, we have the entry-level PC, usually priced in the $400 to $600 range. AMD's APUs are my go-to recommendation here, as they have built-in graphics that are perfectly adequate for 1080p gaming, and that saves you on the cost of buying a discrete graphics card. I also usually recommend them because they use socket AM4 motherboards with inexpensive chipset options like B450 that allow you to overclock and also can be upgraded to a much more powerful CPU in the future. I think an entry-level PC should be just that, entry-level, to get you off and running or gaming, but then also with an eye towards upgrading it in the future. So those are my categories. Now let's go over what parts make sense to use for each one. So as I start here with the entry-level PC, remember that the 7 core components for any gaming PC are going to be the CPU and cooler, which I count as one thing, the graphics card, of course, the motherboard, the memory, storage like an SSD, and then the case and power supply. That's 7. So for the entry-level PC, I've already stated that we're going AMD for the reasons that I stated, so we essentially have 4 processors to choose from that have built-in graphics. The slightly older Ryzen 2200G or 2400G, or the newer 3200G or 3400G. The 3400G is about $150 and includes a cooler, so that's your max price for the CPU and the GPU at this level, which is a huge cost savings. But keep an eye out for deals on the 2200G or 2400G as well, because they can often be found going for less than $100. Our GPU for this build is built into the CPU, so no worries there, and a cost of 0, I guess. Our motherboard is going to be a socket AM4 motherboard for the CPU with a B450 chipset, and you can find reputable boards with good reviews for about $80 to $120. I've recommended this board many times, the MSI B450 Tomahawk. Just bear in mind if you're getting a 3000 class AMD CPU or APU and you're using an older B450 motherboard, you might need to update the UEFI on the board before it will recognize your processor properly. And of course, there's other viable B450 motherboards out there as well. Just make sure you double check your reviews and don't pay more than about 120 bucks for one. For memory, you should be getting 16 gigs of memory via 2 8 gig sticks, so you'll buy a 16 gig kit, 2x8 gigs. You should get DDR4 3000 or faster memory. You can get 3200 or 3600 in particular if you're getting a 3000 series APU, and you should be able to find kits like this for about $80 to $120. For storage, you should set your sights on an SSD, and you want a standard SATA 2.5-inch SSD like this one. You should be able to get a 500 gig class one that will be either 480 gigs or 512 gigs for around $50. That said, you should also keep an eye on just slightly more expensive NVMe M.2 SSDs, as long as your motherboard's compatible with it, but for the entry-level build, you can definitely not go with that and just stick with a less expensive SATA SSD. For a power supply, you should look for a unit that's 550 to 650 watts, 80 plus bronze rated or better, and ideally all black cables. You can usually find units that don't have this ketchup and mustard nonsense on them, and you don't usually have to pay extra for that. You could also look for a unit that's modular or partially modular. That is nice, but not necessary. And then of course go for a unit from a reputable manufacturer like EVGA, Corsair, Be Quiet, or Seasonic. Or Cooler Master. Finally, you will need a case, and you should simply choose a case that fits the motherboard size that you chose. So if you got ATX motherboard, get an ATX case. Same goes for micro ATX or a mini ATX like this one. You should make sure that the case includes a couple fans, or maybe add fans if it doesn't, and then find a well-reviewed model with decent airflow and a design that you like. Here is the area that you can be picky when it comes to aesthetics. You should be able to find one for $50 to $80, which brings the total cost for your entry-level PC, by my estimations, to somewhere between $420 and $600. That's not too bad. Now let's move to the mid-range PC, and here for your CPU and cooler, you're probably going to spend between $200 and $400. On the AMD side, that means you're going to be looking at our AMD Ryzen 3rd Gen, that's 3000 series, and you can go for a 6-core or an 8-core variant, anything from the 3600 or 3600X up to the 3700 or 3800X if you can find a good deal on the 3800X. Those will ship with a stock in-the-box air cooler that you can use that will work just fine for you, although you can also upgrade that down the line if you want. For this type of system, if you're looking at an air cooler, I would consider something like the Hyper 212 Black Edition, which you can find for $35 to $40. Does a very solid job cooling, and it doesn't look too bad either. If you're looking for an Intel build in this range, I would opt for the Intel 9600K, which you can typically find for about $220 to $230. Bear in mind that the K SKU Intel CPUs do not ship with the cooler, so you will need to add one on, again for maybe $30 to $50. For a mid-range graphics card, you're probably going to spend between $250 and $500. On the NVIDIA side, the starter I would recommend, if you're going to spend a little less than $250, would be the GTX 1660, and there's a bunch of different variants of that. If you want to go above that and spend $300 or more, I would recommend the RX 5700 at about $300, or you can spend $350 or more for the 5700 XT. Beyond that, I would look at some of NVIDIA's RTX series cards. You can find good deals on the RTX 2060 Super, and then the RTX 2070 Super would be kind of the top end for this range at about $500. Moving on from there, we want a motherboard, and here I would still stick with the AMD B450 chipset. Here you can also take a look at some of the higher end motherboards from last generation, the AMD X470 boards that might have cooler feature sets, but I would only buy them if they were discounted, maybe spend $100 to $150 on them, because you also have the option now of X570 motherboards that start around $200. On the Intel side, you can find Z390 motherboards in the $150 to $200 range that are very solid and well reviewed. For mid-range memory, I'm once again recommending a 16 gig kit, 2x8 gigs. That gives you 16 gigs to start out with, as well as a couple empty slots in most motherboards to upgrade in the future if you want to. DDR4 3200 is probably where you should start out with this one, and you can find kits that meet those standards. Also recommend low CAS latency if you can find it 17, 16 or below, and you'll spend maybe $100 to $130 on a reasonable kit like that. You can even find some good deals on RGB kits like this, but just don't spend extra for it if you can find the same rated speed kit for less money without the RGB. For SSD storage, same recommendation as the entry level, a 500 gig class SATA SSD, but here again, take a closer look at the potential for NVMe M.2 SSDs. Just make sure they're NVMe and not SATA, because there are SATA M.2 drives like this. These drives can be 3-4 times as fast as a SATA drive when it comes to read and write speeds, and you can find them for $10, $15 or $20 more, and that might be worth considering for you, especially if you're doing lots of reads and writes off of the drive like you would with video editing, for example. For a power supply in this range, still stick with 550 to 650 watts. Same recommendations as before, 80 plus bronze. Take a look at 80 plus gold rated power supplies too, because those will save you a little bit on your power bill long term. All black cables, modular or partially modular. And then of course, reputable manufacturers like the ones I mentioned. I'll add Cooler Master to that list too, because they do some good power supplies as well. Finally, you will need a case. Same qualifications as the entry level case. Make sure it's the same size as the motherboard you chose. And then here you can maybe spend a few bucks more for a better or nicer design. There are cases in the $70 to $100 range that are notably a little bit nicer than the ones in the $50 to $70 range. Total here should be between $880 and $1,505 by my estimations. And now we have the high-end PC. So for our CPU and cooler, we're going to be looking in the $330 to $550 range by my estimation. Here again on the AMD side, you're looking at AMD Ryzen 3rd Gen processors, 8 cores or better. For that, you can get the 3700X, 3800X, 3900X if you're spending around $500. And then on the Intel side, you can look at the 9700K in the $350-ish price range, or the 9900K in the $500 price range. I would pair these up with a nice cooler, maybe a higher end air cooler like the ones that Noctua or Be Quiet makes, or a 240 millimeter or larger AIO, maybe a 361, as long as you can find a good price on one for around $100. The sweet spot for a graphics card for this level build is going to start at $500 with the RTX 2070 Super, which I think is the best bang for the buck in that mid-range market right now. Of course, you could go as high as an RTX 2080 Ti for $1,000 to $1,100. Just bear in mind you're paying a lot more money for the performance of that card, but it would be a suitable fit for this build. My most recent monthly builds video, I did a $1,900 build that included a 2080 Ti as well as an Intel 9700K. A motherboard for this range is probably going to start at about $200. You want a good AMD X570 board or an Intel Z390 board, and going from $200 to $250 is pretty reasonable. For memory, once again, if your focus is gaming, I don't think you need more than 16 gigs right now, so a 2x8 gig kit of DDR4 3200 or better speed memory you can find for $100 to $130. But here you might consider upping it to a 32 gig kit, either 2x16 gig or 4x8 gig, especially if you're going to consider doing some video editing or anything that's more memory intensive, in which case you'd be spending upwards of $200 on your memory. For storage, you want an SSD and you want a 1 terabyte class NVMe M.2 SSD, because these are also very well priced now. They've come down to around $110 to $140, maybe up to $200 if you look at the really fast ones, but you can find really reasonable drives in the $110 to $120 range right now. And 1 terabyte for your main operating system drive gives you a lot of headroom still to install games or apps or anything else you might do. Of course, you could add extra storage. You don't need just one drive. You could put more SSDs or more hard drives in there, but I'll leave that up to you. For a power supply, around 750 watt, 80 plus gold range or better with all the qualifications from before. Probably a modular one here as well, and you're going to probably spend about $120 plus on that. For case, you're going to spend about $100. There's some really solid cases for $100, but of course spend $20, $40, $50 more than that if you find one that suits your needs that's a little bit more expensive, and your total is going to end up being $1,500 to $2,500 depending on your choices in this range. But you're going to get power for your money, which you maybe aren't going to get with the extra PC, which we're going to talk about next. But this one is talking to the people who are going all out, over the top, all the bells and whistles, extra features. Who cares if it adds power, as long as it looks pretty and it does a system that you can take a bunch of pictures of and post on YouTube or whatever. That's what I do. For a CPU for the extra PC, you're gonna start out with a 9900K. That's kind of your baseline. Beyond that, you might consider the high-end Ryzen mainstream processors because they do have cool features like PCI Express Gen 4. I think a 3900X is gonna be your starting out point there since it's equivalent to the 9900K at about 500 bucks. Of course, you got the 3950X coming out soon as well, which will give you 16 cores on a mainstream platform. And then of course, you also have the high-end desktop platform, which I haven't really brought up here, that can give you CPUs with 16 cores or more. Intel has a high-end desktop platform as well. It's just typically not the aim or focus of gaming PCs, which is why I say it's an extra thing that you don't need for gaming, but people will spend money on and build a gaming PC out of anyway. To cool any of those processors, you'll want a high-end 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler, or even more likely a custom liquid cooling loop if money is no object with your extra PC. A GPU is going to be the RTX 2080 Ti. I mean, that's probably bare minimum. Maybe throw two of them in there because, you know, that makes it better. Maybe an RTX Titan as well. I guess, again, Mr. Moneybags, if you've got all that to spend. For a motherboard, you've got sub $200 motherboards, but they're pathetic and weak. You probably want to go with something that's $250 plus that has cool extra features like an RGB infinity window or something like that. Or heck, you know, you might even go with something that costs like 700 bucks because $700 motherboards, even on the mainstream AMD platform, are now a thing as well. Are these even remotely worth the amount of money you spend on them? I can't say for sure, but they certainly are extra. For memory, more is better, of course, if you're going for an extra PC. Who cares whether or not you'll actually use it? So you'll want to bump up from your 16 gig kit, probably to a 32 gig kit at minimum, but let's say 64 gigs is where you should start out with here. It can be very expensive for a kit that's 4x16 gigs or more, but again, it seems like you have lots of money to spend, so that's what you should aim for. For SSDs and storage, you want to go with 2 terabyte NVMe SSDs because you can get 2 terabytes on a single little M.2 drive these days. Go for 2 of them or 4 of them or whatever your motherboard supports. But of course, don't stop there. Configure them in RAID, add extra SSDs or hard drives for more mass storage, and you know, they even have SSDs with RGB on them these days as well, so you should probably go for that. Now, when it comes to the power supply, I always say never skimp on the power supply, and if you're doing an extra build, you should probably consider at least an 850 watt 80 plus platinum or 80 plus titanium rated power supply. But let's be honest, isn't 1000 watts just a nice rounder number? Drop in that 1000 watt power supply, make sure you've got a nice set of sleeved cables or at least all black individual cables, and then consider something like the Asus Thor, I guess, if you want your power supply to also have a digital display on the side of it that tells you how much power you're using, and also, of course, RGB lighting. Next, you'll need a case, and I think about $180 is the starting price for high-end cases, but usually you can find them in the $200 to $300 range with extra features that you may or may not even use. And then, of course, there's always those super high-end $500 plus cases, or you can consider something like the Singularity PC Spectre 2.0 that I'm going to be building in very soon, which starts at $1,400, but I guess we shouldn't let things get too out of hand. And then, of course, the extra PC is going to have extras. You can easily spend $200 plus on RGB fans, LEDs, and controllers, $200 or more on just a custom sleeved cable kit, $500 to $1,000 on a custom cooling loop, $80 on a special RGB NVLink SLI bridge, $1,500 for a monitor, $300 for RGB mechanical keyboard and peripherals, not to mention the cost of software and games that you might install on there. So the total for the extra PC starts at $2,500, but it can easily crank up to $8,000, $10,000 or more. So those are the 4 types of gaming PC that you might build. And of course, you might sit on the crossover point between 2 of them with your current rig. But if there's one takeaway from this video that I'd like to leave you with, it would be this. The extra costs of blinging out a PC with aesthetic enhancements, or even just going for the best possible parts, rather than those that are maybe just a tick or 2 slower, but cost way less, can get out of control very quickly. I thoroughly enjoy building systems like Riptide or like Arctic Panther, but I'd be very hesitant to recommend that anyone who's trying to stick to a budget invest in all those parts. Building a PC yourself is about choosing what makes the most sense for you and your budget. So hopefully this video has helped put things in perspective for you. And if you're looking for some full build parts lists recommendations, check out my monthly build series where just this month I covered 2 systems, one that fits the $500 entry-level category, and one high-end system with a 2080 Ti, not this 2080 Ti, but a good 2080 Ti that comes in at about $1,900. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.